back after 2 years. What shall we do? Hi everyone, it's Summer here. I'm back after 2 years with a 3-part series. Where have I been, you ask? That's none of your business. This series covers all the books that I read in 2020. The 3 parts it is split into are my least favourite books, the books I felt kind of meh about, and my favourite books. To be honest, 2020 wasn't a very good reading year. I listened to a lot of audiobooks. Most books that I listen to on audiobook are books that I think I won't find interesting enough to read. I was right, but that's not the point. Today I'll be talking about my least favourite books, and hopefully I will get round to filming the other 2 parts of this series sometime soon. I read 34 books in 2020, which is surprising because I obviously had a lot of time on my hands because nobody went out. Today I'll be talking about 9 of those books, so let's get started. I only have 2 books to talk about that I actually own. The rest I listen to an audiobook. And the first of the 2 books is Talking with Serial Killers by Christopher Berry D. This is just a collection of stories compiled from interviews that the author had with serial killers. I was honestly disappointed with this book because I went into it without figuring out what it was first. And essentially these, well, as I said, they're stories compiled from interviews, whereas I thought they were going to be actual, transcribed interviews with the serial killers. So that is really the only reason I'm disappointed with this book. And also it was traumatic because I was reading about serial killers, but I went into it knowing that. I just didn't enjoy it. But if you like serial killers, I would recommend it. The next book that I own is one I really wanted to enjoy. It has a great, very interesting premise. Although I will say, I think the summary really spoils most of what happens in the book. So if you are going to read this book, I wouldn't read the summary. So I'm going to try and summarise it without summarising it. This is Almond by Won Byung-sung. It's a novel translated to English from Korean. I picked this book up because Namjoon from BTS read it and I found out what the book was about and I thought it sounded interesting. Not just because Namjoon read it. Okay, I'm not weird. This book follows a boy called Yoonjae who was born with a brain condition called alexithymia. I'm going to go with alexithymia. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. And this condition makes him unable to feel emotions like fear, anger, happiness. And so all his life, his mother has been kind of training him in social cues, like when to smile, when to say thank you, etc, etc, etc. And all goes well in his life, reasonably, until his 16th birthday, when an act of violence shatters his world and leaves him all alone. Struggling to cope with his loss, Yoonjae kind of isolates himself until a boy called Gon arrives at his school and starts to bully him. But Gon is stumped by Yoonjae's impassive calmness, essentially, because Yoonjae is unaffected. He is unafraid of Gon, although Gon is a bully, and that is not the reaction Gon usually expects. And so, against all odds, these 2 end up becoming friends, and I'm just going to say the story goes from there. I went into this book very excited because it had a very interesting premise about a boy who could not feel anything. But I was actually really disappointed with it, and I think it may have something to do with the fact I was reading from obviously the point of view of an emotionless narrator, and possibly also the fact that it was a translation, and sometimes translations kind of lose their oomph or whatever you want to call it. Also, wasn't too keen on the ending of this book. It was just a bit It just didn't feel very realistic to me, although I know nothing about brain disorders and everything that went down. I just was just a bit wish fulfillment, if you asked me. But I like the characters. It was an interesting concept. It was a bit interesting to read, but overall it was just very disappointing. And that's all I have to say about it. The next book I read on audiobook. It was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This book follows the Creed family when they move into a beautiful new house and they've got this picturesque life. A lovely daughter who's about 5 years old, an infant son, a mother, and a father who's a physician. But the nearby woods hold a blood-chilling secret, and the Creeds are about to learn that sometimes dead is better. And I really wanted to like this book when I went into it. I'd heard that it was one of Stephen King's most scary books. It really wasn't. I didn't really like the characters in it. I didn't really care about anyone. I thought the ending was strange. And maybe if I watched the movie it might have more of an impact on me. Maybe it would make me more scared, but I just wasn't very scared of this. And I'm always a bit iffy about Stephen King's writing. There have been books with stories I've liked, but there's always just something off-putting about his characters, I think. And while I find those characters interesting to read about, I never really become emotionally attached to them because they're kind of unlikable. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I didn't like it very much. I don't know why I picked this book up. It was just, oh, it's a classic. I should probably read that at some point in my life. Bleh. This was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This story is narrated by a man called Nick Carraway. In the spring of 1922, Nick moves to this small village called West Egg, and there he meets a fabulously wealthy man called Jay Gatsby. The story follows Jay Gatsby through Nick's eyes as Gatsby falls in love with this woman called Daisy Buchanan. And that's pretty much what the story is. I cannot express with words how much I hated this book. I read somewhere that it was actually very unpopular when it was first published, and I understand why. I don't know if that's me missing some deep message that was in the book, because I didn't bother reading an essay on it or anything to try and understand it, but I just found the characters unlikable. I just hated it. I don't know. I can't say anything, but I just really disliked it. It was kind of an interesting concept. I also watched the movie for it, which made me like it even less, because it felt a bit like I'd taken it felt like the movie was maybe on speed. I'm not even sure if that makes sense, because I've never been on speed, but it's sort of just what I imagined being on speed would be like. I just remember watching them drive in it, the car driving scenes. It was just weird. I didn't like it. And that's all I'm going to say. The next 4 books I read were the After series by Anna Todd, and I went into this knowing I wasn't going to like it. I just wanted to kind of be part of the whole hate train, and I did. I hated it. This is a well-known Harry Styles fanfiction that was adapted into an original series, if you don't know. So it was originally written about Harry Styles, so I'd like you to keep that in mind. And this follows a young girl called Tessa. She's leaving her mum's house for the first time and going off to college. And there at the college, she meets a bad boy called Hardin Scott, and they proceed to have a wild romance, abusive relationship. Yeah, that's the whole premise of the whole series, is just them on and off, getting together, breaking up, fighting, yelling at each other, Hardin abusing her. Honestly though, the first 3 books were terrible. The 4th book was still terrible, but I will say it was slightly redeeming in the fact that I feel like it tried to go the right way, and then it didn't go the right way, but at the same time it did. It doesn't really make any sense. Anyway, the characters were hollow and they sucked, and Hardin was downright manipulative and awful, and he just, no, they should never have gotten together. They should never have stayed together. I don't understand how this series ended up with 4 books. I don't understand how you can drag a story out that much. Yeah, I don't feel like there's anything that I can say about this book that 5,000 other people haven't already said about it, so I will stop there. And I'll tell you about my least favourite book of 2020. This was admittedly another book I went into not expecting to enjoy, but also not expecting the awfulness that I got. I read Call Me By Your Name by Andrew Ackerman. This story, if you didn't know, is a sudden and powerful romance between an adolescent boy and a guest at his parents' cliffside mansion on the Italian Riviera. What grows from the depths of their spirits is a 6-week-long passionate romance. It's an experience that marks them for a lifetime. For what the two discover is the one thing they fear they'll never find again: total intimacy. This follows a boy called Elio, who is 17 years old, and a 24-year-old man called Oliver. Essentially, it's creepy. I hate it. Yes, I know the legal age of consent. Even in the UK it's 16, and in Italy it's 14. I don't know what the fuck to say about that, but change it. Even putting aside the fact that the age difference is kind of fucked up, the romance itself would have been strange. It wasn't romantic, it was creepy and kind of pervy. I watched the movie for this as well, and just to give you an example of kind of what I mean about the relationship being weird, just a small example. There was one scene where Oliver essentially pushed Elio down and held him down. Elio was objecting to something, and when Elio struggled and said it hurt him that Oliver was holding him down, Oliver went, "Well, if you didn't struggle, it wouldn't hurt." I feel like that explains it all if you have enough of a brain to comprehend what I mean. You don't do that, that's not normal. It wouldn't hurt if you didn't struggle. Yeah, duh, but you shouldn't be holding me down in the first place. The relationship wasn't romance, it was this weird, Oliver was just pissing about with this 17-year-old boy. And the weird things that Elio thought as well, inside Elio's head was weird. There was some fucked up shit that went on in there. And admittedly he didn't do it, but I don't see how I'm supposed to really sympathise or love this character when I'm hearing about him fantasise about raping. So yeah, I hate both the characters. It was awful and horrible and terrible, and I will be reading the second book. That's the end of the video, bye.